Good evening. It is my very great pleasure to introduce to you our speaker this evening. Some of you will never have heard him before. Sam Wells, the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells. I have known Sam for about 32 years. During that time, I've introduced him to many people in many places. The scariest, of course, was introducing the boyfriend I then had to his future parents-in-law. But I don't think I've ever had the privilege of introducing the vicar in his own church, or to 200 people here, and I think more, 300, I'm looking at the camera now, 300 or more people online. Great that you outnumber the invisible cloud of witnesses here. And over the years, we've shared many things, but we've never shared a platform before. So this is going to be fun. Here I stand, or rather in a moment, here he will stand. And at the risk of a spoiler, it may not surprise you that his stand is going to evolve around one little word, the word with. Who would ever think that one short word could turn into a 50-minute lecture, let alone a good few books, as well as an inquirer's course to rival that of Alpha? He said to me yesterday that the journey of being with began in about 2008 when he wrote God's Companions. But if I may, I want to offer you my perspective. It began long before that. I understand at one stage in his teenage years, Sam thought of becoming a journalist, but dismissed it when he realized he didn't want a life that risked commentating on stuff he wasn't involved in. In other words, he wanted more being with. Through his student years, he could easily have got carried away in the university/academic scene, but though he relished the world of ideas, it wasn't grounded enough for him. In other words, he was worried about ideas getting too abstract. There wasn't enough being with. When I first met Sam, he was doing his curacy in a parish just outside Newcastle, Wallsend, the end of the wall, Hadrian's Wall. He loved it there, not only because Alan Shearer grew up there. It was Wallsend Boys Club where he first played football, but also because Wallsend was what was then termed a UPA, an urban priority area. In other words, ministry for Sam involved being with those at risk of exclusion, whether that was playing football with the Wallsend Boys Club and picking up any tickets he could, still he will do that, to go and see Newcastle United, or being with folk who were at risk of losing their livelihood because the shipbuilding industry on the Tyne was sinking and unemployment was rising. Those were the circumstances that brought Sam's heart to beat and his doctoral study to flow and his first book to come out. Sam has done all his theology through being with those on the edge. He's published 46 books, that is more than I have read, and every single one has been sparked through and written from a place of being with. When very graciously he followed me down south in a move to Cambridge, that same sense of call landed him in an outer urban parish in Norwich, which, if I recall correctly, found itself placed fourth bottom of all the various socio-economic measures for the whole of the east of England. Where were the other three, I asked him. When Duke University came knocking and we became persuaded to move to that North Carolina wonderland of brilliant students, outrageous ambition, and a whopping great Gothic chapel seating 1,500 people regularly, the calling only made sense to Sam when he realized the call from the university to help them engage being with in their city of Durham, where they were located, a rundown city which had previously been a problem and a threat. So that's my little bio to rival the one on the website or the one in your brochure. Before I hand over to him this evening, let me just say a few words about the plan. First, in the unlikely event of an emergency, the exit is mainly behind you. I think there's another one here in absolute emergency. After Sam has given, a 50-minute lecture, I will be the first that gets to have some conversation with him and pick up 2 or 3 questions prompted from his lecture while you have chance to formulate yours. And we'll come to that by queuing tidily, like good British people, behind that microphone when the time comes, so that we can pick up all the questions for the online streaming as well. After the floor is open, we will aim to end at 8:30, and after that, just know that there's a drink downstairs and approximately 46 books, should you wish to buy one from the bookstall or even get it signed. So, without further ado, over to Sam.
Well, thank you for that very generous and illuminating introduction. And very kind indeed. I appreciate it very much. And it's a great honor to speak at this exalted church and to be part of this distinguished series. So thank you for having me. My remarks tonight come in 3 parts. I'm going to begin by what it's like for all of us to face our mortality. For all our passion about who wins a sporting contest or fixation on getting a new job we've applied for, in the end, the overwhelming challenge of our lives is how we live in the face of the fact that we're going to die. Then second, I'm going to identify what I discern to be the constituents of a life we can live in the face of our mortality. Then third, I'm going to try to draw together the first set of insights with the second set and articulate the convictions around which I base my life. In conclusion, I'll try to distill all of the above into a sentence or 2. So, I begin with our mortality. Probably all of us have stood by a graveside or otherwise contemplated the loss of a person we cherished and cannot imagine being without. And I'm sure every one of us has looked down the tunnel of our own death and wondered, what will become of me? Both what, if anything, will be my future, and what will become of all my thoughts and deeds my whole life long. What we're pondering about a close companion or ourselves is the question of significance. What will last when the tide of time and mortality sweeps all away? I'm going to outline one possible approach to finding significance and then consider 4 alternatives. The simple approach I'll call humility. How, I think, can I have any significance in a universe of 100 million galaxies where each galaxy has 100 million stars? I am unimaginably small, and the possibility of my having any true significance is denial and fantasy. I shall just try to plough my little furrow and find a little happiness, live peaceably with my neighbors, and maybe leave the world a little better than I found it. It sounds a simple ethic, but it's not a place many people can remain a whole lifetime. Humankind has within it an urge to seek, to strive, to yearn, to dream for something more. Mere humility can be a sign of deep contentment, but can also be a counsel of despair and resignation, like going down with the ship without even trying out one of the lifeboats. Our search for survival and our need to matter requires us to tend in one of the subsequent 4 directions, the first of which I'll call hustle. For some people, life is inherently competitive, and you need to get your elbows out to survive and thrive. You have to be crafty to learn a few skills to get ahead of others, and to suppress any pangs of conscience that might slow you down. There's no use speculating on how or why we came to be here. Life is a game, and the stopwatch has already started, so best grab and seize and snatch and grasp so you can consume and acquire and control and collect, and thus diminish your vulnerability and enhance your security. Hustle believes life is fundamentally constituted by desire, and the secret is to discover and implement techniques for attaining the object of desire more successfully than others, in a universe essentially constituted by competition. Something like this lies behind every workaholic, overfunctioner, or overachiever, each of whom thinks that idleness is the path to doom, yet success is attainable if only you try hard enough. A more sophisticated alternative I'll call honor. Honor is where you say, I can't comprehend the magnitude of what existence entails, so I'm going to hold on to just a few things that will come over time to constitute my identity. Perhaps a spouse, maybe children, possibly my country, especially if its integrity is at stake, maybe a cause close to my experience, like helping people who face motor neuron disease or raising money for leukemia research. Things I'm happy to wear on my sleeve and fight for. That's where I find significance. Honor believes life may be driven by impersonal forces like physics and economics, but to make life human means holding tight to certain things as long as possible until time and mortality eventually prize them from your grasp. A third approach I'll call heritage. This recognizes that there isn't a question we face in life that others haven't faced countless times before, and thus that it might be an idea to spend time seriously ingesting the best wisdom available and inhabiting a tradition with time-honored validity. Yes, we might find ourselves sometimes in tension with it, and yes, it does require us to set aside the impulse to find out everything for ourselves. But while our forebears didn't know everything, it's idle to say the human search for truth only began when I showed up. Heritage believes that the sum total of human creativity and Earth's fecundity constitute an object of wonder from which we can spend a lifetime simply learning. The meaning lies in the whole rather than a single nugget of truth. The last form of the search for significance we could call the Homeric. This sees each of us as solitary individuals pursuing a lone quest for meaning and truth in an indifferent and sometimes hostile world. Life is an odyssey in which the ship of our existence puts in at various harbors, geographical, professional, emotional, and psychological, and we put together our own significance as a patchwork of memories, dreams, and reflections. The Homeric quest believes life is a perpetual journey, and the discovery is that the wisdom gained en route proves more significant than any destination. While I share the intense desire for existence in general and my life in particular to have significance, and I see the appeal of all of these ways of seeking it, I want to identify some things they all lack, which I believe are essential to any true significance. What's implicit in humility and shows up slightly in the heritage approach, but not elsewhere, is the truth that the story of everything doesn't have me as the main character. The first step to finding significance is to decenter yourself from the story. Our significance is not in the way all other things in the universe amplify the wondrous splendor of ourselves. It lies in finding our place in a story. What is hinted at in honor, but absent in the other approaches, is that the true quality of existence lies in relationship. Not just as in heritage, our relationship with those who can inform, educate, and entertain us, but in finding relationship that has no extraneous value and is valid simply for the relationship itself. Meanwhile, significance is not something you chisel out like a sculptor creating a statue. Significance is something that's bestowed. It's like belonging. You can't achieve it. It has to be given and gradually discovered. And the last thing the conventional approaches to finding significance don't tend to grasp is that we find meaning and truth in story. Story is the way we order a sequence of otherwise incoherent and unconnected insights, characters, and events into a plausible and compelling whole. So rather than pursue the path of humility, hustle, honor, heritage, or Homeric quest, I've found significance in these 4 insights. Number 1, significance is not achieved but bestowed. Number 2, significance is fundamentally found in relationship. Number 3, relationship is characterized by story. And number 4, the way to understand story is to begin by recognizing the story is not fundamentally about me. All of these crystallize in the notion of belonging. Thus, belonging can't be achieved or earned. It is always a gift, a sense of being offered solidarity where there could easily or has previously been isolation. Belonging is always about relationship, about a pattern of interactions that transcend the instrumental and become valid for their own sake. Belonging is invariably understood in terms of story, a story of exclusion or ostracism, turning into one of mutuality, acceptance, and embrace. And belonging is always about finding a truth deeper than one can embody alone, a truth that lies beyond, a truth more mystical than merely rational, a truth that however close you draw to it, you still in some sense behold and cannot quantify. These 4 features of belonging, you may already have noticed, all have rather familiar Christian names. The first, that it's all gift, is conventionally called grace. The second, that it's all about relationship, is customarily called love. The third, that relationship finds its character in the form of story, is called hope. And the fourth, that the story isn't one fundamentally about us, but is centered elsewhere in one who graciously incorporates us regardless of our desiring or deserving, that final feature is called faith. By naming grace together with faith, hope, and love, I've brought our search for significance into the realm of Christianity, but perhaps not from a conventional route. I want to continue in this trajectory and see how these 4 features work together to constitute a place, to use the words of our lecture series, we might stand. So, end of part 1. Part 2. I'm going to take you on a journey of 7 steps by which I suggest we may arrive at a healthy combination of humility, hustle, honor, heritage, and Homeric quest, all reshaped by faith, hope, love, and grace. So to step 1. I'm going to start with the nature of all things. Here we have 3 choices. We can say, as some astrophysicists do, that there's only one reality, that there's no need for an external cause for the Big Bang, that existence began in a massive explosion and will one day cease in a big crunch, and that time and space are so causally connected that in the end there's no difference between them. That's choice 1. Choice 2 is that there are 2 realities. There's something called essence, which lasts forever, and there's something called existence, which lasts for a limited time. There was no need for there ever to be existence, and thus the fact of existence is the original mystery, miracle, marvel that stands at the pinnacle of all awesome discoveries. See how choice 2 decenters existence and dismantles the self-importance of our lives. Existence itself, the foundation of all we think we know, is itself contingent on something beyond, something more central, something more permanent. That's choice 2. Choice 3 is that this universe is only one of a number of universes, and thus that there's multiple existences. That's a mind-boggling notion, whether those multiple existences are 8 or 8 billion. But from the perspective of choice 2, it's still very limited. Because when choice 2 talks of essence, essence isn't just a parallel existence or even 8 million such alternative existences. Essence is utterly different in quality from existence and infinitely more textured and complex. A good way to get a glimpse of the glory of essence is that it's indescribably more wondrous than a million universes. You can see why, given this threefold choice between the singularity of a self-contained existence, the duality of an existence that issues out of essence, and the multiplicity of many existences, I take my stand on the ground of the duality of existence and essence. This seems to me the only explanation for this world, this universe being so much, yet not everything. It's not territory any but the boldest astrophysicist would venture into, because physics, by definition, studies existence and has no judgment on essence, which is why I don't find reading books about astrophysics threatening, to the extent that I understand them, because they're not talking about what I'm thinking about. Space and time have little or nothing to do with eternity. So here's my first platform. There is existence, and beyond existence there is essence. Here I stand. Now to the second step. What is essence? Let's go back to my 4 insights. First, significance is not achieved but bestowed. That begs the question, who does the bestowing? Second, significance is fundamentally found in relationship. I'm going to pause there and come back to the other 2 in a moment. Essence is relationship. That's another choice point. It seems to me it's one of the most distinctive elements of Christianity. Islam and Judaism understand the notion of divine-human relationship, but Christianity maintains that essence, or that which lasts forever, or God as we most often say, is inherently relationship. The language Christianity uses for this is Trinity. God is 3 persons in utter and dynamic relationship. That's the heart of it all. That's the epicenter of everything, the epitome of truth. The choices are again 3. Option 1, essence is impersonal, mechanical, a physical, chemical reaction, but no more. Option 2, essence is personal and purposive. Option 3, essence is inherently relational, not just externally, but internally. God is a trinity of persons, equal, interactive, effervescent. You'll see how option 3 is indescribably more awesome and wondrous than the other 2 options. Here we see the fundamental heart of Christianity. God, who is utter relationship, overflows from that relationship into seeking a relationship beyond, a relationship with a partner, an enormous plenitude of partners. It's often said that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity believe in the same God. Well, that's of course true if you're saying that there's a difference between essence that lasts forever and existence that doesn't, and that God is about essence and we're about existence. But the Christian understanding of God is that relationship isn't a second step for God, but is absolutely what God is. The Trinity isn't a person that chooses to pursue relationship. The Trinity is relationship itself. which means in our lives, in existence, relationship isn't a route to a destination of something more useful, valuable, or tangible. Relationship is that destination. So here is my second platform. God is relationship and seeks relationship. Here I stand. And so to the third step. What does it entail for God to seek relationship? It entails two things. The first is that God must be so shaped as to be in external relationship. This is a great mystery. Was God utterly fulfilled in inner Trinitarian dynamics, moved in some way to be altered to make relationship elsewhere? Or was that, from all eternity, always God's shape and inclination? Whatever the answer to that question, the name we give to the shape God takes to be in external relationship is incarnation. Incarnation means God being completely God, but also being completely human. It means something Genesis doesn't fully say and Darwin doesn't allow for, that God being with us in Christ was the reason for existence in the first place. Humanity came about not simply as a result of evolution or as a consequence of God wanting a companion. Humankind exists so God could be incarnate. The second thing entailed in God's pursuit of relationship is the need for a setting for that relationship. The name for that setting is creation. Creation comes about as the setting for the incarnation. So here is my third platform. God is relationship and seeks relationship. Creation owes its existence not simply to the Big Bang, as for astrophysics, or evolution, as for Darwin, or simply to God's creative impulse, as for Genesis, but as the theatre in which God would become one like us and dwell with us. That is the purpose behind existence. Here I stand. Now to the fourth step. Where is existence going? I said earlier that it's in the definition of existence that it doesn't last forever. It would be a bit harsh to call it an experiment, but it's certainly provisional in contrast to essence that's permanent and eternal. This next step is perhaps an even bigger one to get our head round than the notion that creation came about as a theatre for God to be with us in Christ. This is the ultimate purpose of all things, and that is as a kind of reverse of the incarnation. The purpose of creation is that God became what we are and be with us in Christ. But creation doesn't have the last word. That's not by any means the end of the story. The end of the story is that we become what God is, at least in the sense that through resurrection we become God's companions forever, beyond creation, beyond mortality, beyond the flaws of our current existence, that we are with God, with one another, and with the new creation forever. We are taken into essence, not to be God, but to be eternally with God, not to be absorbed into God, but to be in God's presence, as the psalm says, where we find the fullness of joy. So here is my fourth platform. The ultimate purpose of humankind is to be God's companion forever, which shows God has no ultimate aim that does not involve being with us, and that we have no ultimate meaning other than in relationship to God. Here I stand. The fifth step is to say, how do we know that there is essence beyond existence? How do we know that that essence is personal, indeed Trinitarian? How do we know that God seeks relationship and destines us to be in relationship forever? The answer to all these questions is a single word. That word is Jesus. Imagine an hourglass and think of the top half as existence, which thinks of itself as all-encompassing, and yet is largely unaware of the bottom half on which it depends, which is essence. Then focus your attention on the aperture between the top half of the hourglass and the bottom. That aperture through which all the sand passes wholly belongs to the top half and wholly belongs to the bottom half. That aperture is Jesus, through whom God is with us and through whom we are with God. As we customarily put it, Jesus is fully human and fully divine. This fifth step is perhaps where a person of my convictions ought to begin. I didn't begin there because I'm not sure we fully appreciate step 5 until we've got a grasp of the first 4 steps. Now, there are 2 common misconceptions about Jesus. The first, that of what we might call the world, is that Jesus is simply fully human. This is a perfectly understandable view. The Christian claim is about something absolutely unique, and completely unique phenomena are almost by definition, and certainly by scientific method, practically unbelievable. We need to set aside aspirations to proof and accept that it's almost impossible to prove or disprove a unique phenomenon. I actually welcome the secular view that Jesus is fully human because it's a healthy counter to the alternative misconception. That's the hyper-Christian popular view that Jesus is wholly divine and no more than superficially human at all. That latter view devalues existence as the price of asserting essence. It takes away the very heart of Christianity, which is God seeking genuine relationship with us so earnestly that God becomes one of us without ceasing to be God. And here we've reached the epicenter of what I think Christianity is fundamentally about. It's about the truth deep in the heart of God, made known in God's covenant with Israel, fully and utterly embodied in the life of Jesus, and to be finally realized in the life we'll share beyond existence, that the bedrock of all reality and purpose and the only sure ground of significance lies in the word with. All solitariness is ancillary to togetherness. All endeavor is a means towards the end of being with one another. The life of God, the nature of the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is inherently relational. Relationship isn't a collaborative technique to enhance effectiveness and pool resources and advance towards some worthy end. It is the end towards which all things tend. In the life beyond existence, in the eternity of essence, there will be no work, no striving, no means we have to employ to reach some appropriate end. There will be only end, only relationship, only with. We will be with God, with ourselves, with one another, and with the renewed creation. The 4 great divisions, the 4 great alienations of our existence, our separation from God, ourselves, one another, and the creation, will cease. All will be relationship, and relationship will be more than enough, beyond every beyond. All of this we discover in Jesus. We see in the Gospels how Jesus is utterly with God, speaking as Son to Father, utterly in sync with the Spirit. We see how Jesus is utterly with himself, content alone, content to linger in Nazareth, content with his calling, content with the costs of his coming. We see how Jesus is utterly with us, weeping at the death of Lazarus, abiding with Mary and Martha, standing alongside the woman caught in adultery, in the Beatitudes offering his own autobiography of solidarity with the deprived and oppressed. We see how Jesus is utterly with creation, dwelling with the wild beasts in the wilderness, walking on the water, describing his realm in the imagery of agriculture. So here is my 5th platform. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, as he was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Here I stand. The 6th step is to recognize the tragedy of Jesus being with us. And this is to return to the 3rd of the 4 insights I outlined earlier. Relationship is characterized by story. The relationship between God and humankind, embodied by Jesus, does not go well. Jesus experiences betrayal, desertion, perfidy, oppression, injustice, calumny, humiliation, agony, insult, violence, hatred. Humankind has an allergic reaction to being with God. The Gospels tell the story of who Jesus is, how he manifests what it means to be with us, and how we utterly fail to be with him. Every human being can locate themselves among the range of responses the Gospels portray towards Jesus. But these responses are not static. Jesus does not come among us simply at an isolated moment in time. He experiences the danger of Bethlehem, the escape of Egypt, the nurture of Nazareth, the wilds of the wilderness, the fervor of Galilee, the maelstrom of Jerusalem, the restoration of Galilee again. His story encompasses the range, the undulation, and the scope of human emotion and experience in its grief and joy, its fear and hope. It devalues the texture of this story and empties Jesus' being with us of all significance if one assumes Jesus came among us in order to die. That is not to deny his death was inevitable, in due course, because he was fully human, and perhaps as a young man and brutally, because humankind was always likely to have an allergic reaction to him. But to acknowledge these things is not to say he came with a specific commission to take on his shoulders the whole weight of human shortcomings and by his death atone for them. Such a claim misses the heart of Christianity. Jesus came to embody definitively what it means, always meant, and always will mean for God to be with us. That's a much bigger scope than simply coming to eradicate sin. If I now summarize the 5 steps I've outlined to this point, the significance of the cross should become clear. Number 1, there is existence, and beyond existence there is essence. Number 2, God is relationship and seeks relationship. Number 3, creation is the theater in which God becomes one like us and dwells with us. Number 4, the ultimate purpose of humankind is to be God's companion forever. Number 5, Jesus is God with us. Now consider those 5 statements in the light of the cross. To say all 5 statements depend upon Jesus dying in a particular way to conquer something or substitute for someone or be a sacrifice to atone for something else is absurd. The mistake such claims make is crystallized in my 4th insight earlier. They all assume the story is about us. They all assume the point of God is to fix our 2 human problems. Number 1, mortality, that we die, and number 2, guilt, that we sin. And that Jesus is a piece of technology that neatly fixes these 2 problems and then is no further use to us. But that is the fundamental flaw in anthropocentric theology. It makes God a device in an intrinsically human story. What we need to do is to turn the story round and make it a truly theocentric story, a story perceived from God's point of view. This is a discipline known as theology, after all. The clue is in the name. Once we do that, this is what we see. God is relationship, the persons of the Trinity being with one another. God creates the universe for relationship, fundamentally to be with us. God ultimately purposes to draw us into essence and thus to be with us in the renewed creation forever. In Jesus, God comes among us in an embodied way to be with us definitively and utterly. Against this heritage and destiny, we can see clearly what the cross means. If Jesus walks down the Via Dolorosa and halfway along says, actually, do you know what? I don't fancy it. Could you send those armies of angels and scoop me up so I don't have to go through with this? The crisis is not that he flukes the moment when he fixes the human sin and guilt problem. The crisis is that God has in Trinity, creation, eschatology, and incarnation displayed an absolutely consistent commitment to be with us come what may, whatever befall, and that here, when that resolution, which is the very identity of God, is put to its ultimate test, Jesus would be denying the intrinsic reality of who he is, who God is. It would question, overturn, discredit, even invalidate the fundamental character of God, the very bedrock of essence and existence. That's some crisis. That's a far more poignant understanding of the cross than the idea that Jesus was performing some kind of preordained script. So Jesus does go to the cross after reflecting most obviously in the Garden of Gethsemane on the reasons why he might not want to do so. And what exactly happens on the cross? Why is the cross rightly the center of Christian devotion, even if not because it's a device for fixing our sin and guilt problem? Two things happen on the cross. First, Jesus has to choose between being with the Father and being with us. The way the cross stretches Jesus to breaking point is clear in his dying words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This moment literally tears Jesus in two because he is fully human and fully God. But right at this second, he can't be fully with us and fully with the Father. And the moment is made more acute because we have done everything we could possibly do to make it clear we don't want to be with him. Yet he still chooses to be with us. That's what the cross means, God's utter, unshakable will to be with us regardless of our aversion to return the compliment and whatever the cost to God. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall. But there's more. There's the second thing that happens on the cross. The Father has to choose whether to let the Son be with us or whether to insist that the relationship of the Trinity is unbreakable, even if that means sundering God's unshakable commitment to be with us. Notice Jesus' dying words, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Spirit is usually translated with a lowercase s, but it could just as easily be translated with a capital S and mean Holy Spirit. Jesus is saying he is utterly bereft and alone, abandoned by humankind and isolated from the Father and the Holy Spirit. This is the most awesome moment in all eternity. Yet the Father lets it happen because Jesus is embodying and enduring the ultimate consequence of God's fundamental commitment to be with us, come what may. It's not a conquest, it's a gift. If there is any triumph, it is the triumph of with over for. It's the complete demonstration that God is a God of with rather than a God of for, a God of solidarity rather than a God of fixing problems. That is the climax of the story of God, a demonstration that we will never walk alone. Here I stand. The seventh step is the vindication of the first 5 steps in the face of the 6th step. In short, the apocalyptic sight of Jesus going to such lengths to be with us that it jeopardizes the integrity of the Trinity does not have the last word. The last word lies with the Spirit breathing new life into Jesus and reuniting the Trinity and restoring God and humankind to be with one another again and forever. The word for all those things is resurrection. And the moment they all take place at the same time is Easter Day. Note what Easter Day isn't. It isn't the immediate and total obliteration of our guilt and mortality problem. This is the other flaw in the traditional account of Christ's passion. In the traditional account, Jesus conquers sin and death. But as countless observers have noted, not least in the light of the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and the Rwandan genocide, to name but 3 of the most egregious moments in human history, sin and death are still very much with us. But so is Jesus. And that is the point. If you take the assumption of that God is for us and is around to fix all our problems, then you must accept the criticisms of those in every century who've said that God is either a monster, a failure, or more politely, an underachiever. But if you take the recognition that God is with us, you realize the resurrection is a statement not of conquest, but of utter, unbreakable, and unending solidarity, whatever happens. Easter is a convergence of creation. Remember, it happens on the first day of the week, and eschatology, because it displays in Jesus what will happen to humankind and the whole creation on the last day. It shows us the presence of God in Christ that we see in the incarnation and the relentless commitment of God to us that we behold in the crucifixion. It is truly the day of all days that contains every other day. The resurrection proclaims and demonstrates that eternity will be with God and nothing can separate us from God's love. Here I stand. We can imagine Eastern and Western theology like this. Western theology is like an arch that stretches from the fall to the cross. It's obsessed with the way the cross reverses the results of the fall. Eastern theology has a much larger arch that begins before the fall at creation and ends after the cross at the last day. Hence, despite the Eastern Orthodox Church being much smaller than the Western Catholic and Protestant churches, Eastern theologians have asserted that they have a much bigger God. I humbly suggest that the story I've been telling here is a third arch, bigger still than the Eastern arch, one that stretches from Trinity to eternity. And I humbly suggest that though the Eastern arch is commendably bigger than the Western arch, the Eastern arch is still rather too much of an anthropocentric story and is still too much tied to a God of four, whereas the third arch I'm describing is a theocentric story about a God of with. So, bringing all that together, the significance of where I stand. That's the second part of my lecture on the 7 steps that shape the ground on which I stand. I want to take you back to the 4 insights about significance I mentioned earlier. You'll recall I maintained that significance is not achieved but bestowed. Significance is fundamentally found in relationship. Relationship is characterized by story, and the way to understand story is to begin by recognizing the story is not fundamentally about me. What I want to suggest is that these 4 insights offer us the elements from which we can build an account of what sin is. For me, sin is that which inhibits being with, that denies our origin and contradicts our destiny, that runs counter to our purpose and obscures our identity. To take the first insight, sin is an action that entirely denies our existence as a gift, but instead treats it as a right and an entitlement to do with as we please. To take the second insight, sin is that which dismantles, poisons, and destroys relationship. To take the third insight, sin substitutes a false story for a true one. To take the fourth insight, sin makes the story always about me and never about God. To take the definitive example, the serpent persuades Eve, and Eve persuades Adam that they don't have to regard Eden as a gift, but can treat it as a possession. The serpent's words poison the relationship between them and God, and ultimately between them and each other and Eden itself. The serpent tells them a false story that turns abundance into scarcity, diverting their attention from the glory of the whole garden to focus on the one fruit they can't eat. And the only way for them to be restored is to re-enter a story that is all about not them but God. I want to finish by reflecting on the fact that I speak these words in St. Martin in the Fields. No ordinary church, but absolutely a church. Only when we grasp the 7 steps I've laid out about who God is, and when we recognize and acknowledge the truth of how sin inhibits our lives, can we appreciate what it means to be church. For church is the community in which we seek to live the true story of the 7 steps above in the light of the false story I've briefly just outlined. See what church isn't. Church isn't tapping into the signs of salvation, baptism, and Eucharist to ensure we benefit from Christ's passion in such a way that when we die, we go upstairs rather than downstairs. Church is allowing us to be enfolded into a true story in which we're defined not by our asserted identity, but by our grace-filled belonging. That true story is not one about us, but one in which we're incorporated and granted a role in a story that's all about God. And that true story is one that is in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be about relationship, about God's original, continuing, unbreakable, and ultimate commitment to be in relationship with us. Which means church is about embodying what it means to be with in 4 dimensions. First, to be with God, to pray and thus to enter that point of the aperture between existence and essence,
that Jesus occupies, which is why we end our prayers through Jesus Christ. To pray is to see paltry existence from wondrous essence, and thus to confess our failure, to see wondrous essence from paltry existence, and thus to marvel and exalt, to offer to essence the fragility of existence, and thus to intercede, to perceive the aperture of Jesus between essence and existence, and the perpetual being with that embodies, and thus to give thanks. Second, to be with ourselves is to be our own companion the way God is with us, to love ourselves the way God loves us, not to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of guilt or self-rejection, but to fulfill the vocation the Spirit gives to us alone. Third, to be with one another is both to form a community of hope that demonstrates the possibilities of social relations not found elsewhere, and to anticipate heaven by striving to be with all God's children in the light of the true story that there is enough for all and to spare. The calling of the church is to be with one another now the way we'll be together forever, most obviously to celebrate and embrace those whom the world reviles and persecutes, yet Jesus calls blessed. Fourth, to be with creation is to live God's future now by treating our world as a gift to be enjoyed, not a resource to be expended. In short, it's all about grace, it's all about it's all about story, and it's all about God. The word that draws together grace with story and God is Jesus. And this is the answer to the question with which we began. The significance of our lives is the degree to which we appreciate what Jesus means, not as a device to fix our temporal and eternal problems, not as a badge that makes one person better, more blessed, or more righteous than another, but as a mystery of essence and existence that we shall never fathom, but are instead invited to explore together. That universal invitation and shared exploration is not simply the significance of our lives, but the way we shall live forever. Here I stand.
Here I stand, he says, and sits down. Not for very long. We've got a good half hour if we need it. The pattern from here is I'm going to invite Sam back to the microphone in a minute, and we'll do some engaging in that lecture. I have a few questions, but I'd love you to think through your questions. And after I've had a go, it'll be your turn. Let me just say to the people online, we have a system for you too. I hope across the screen as I speak, you will see an email address for Jolly Gosnold at smitf.org, jolly.gosnold@smitf.org, so that you can put your questions to him and he will read them out for you. We don't want you to be left out. Okay. Tremendous. Sam, that was pretty comprehensive. You started with the nature of all things. You dismantled our sense of self-importance, if we have it. You offered us a new Christology. You rewrote a theology of the atonement. You turned Western theology on its head. You united East and West, and then out-narrated both of them. And then you ended with a theology of sin, a theology of prayer, a theology of the church. You may say, here I stand, but I'm feeling tossed upside down.
You're welcome.
So I think I want to ask you, you didn't really say, "Here I stand." You told us where we all stand. How do we receive it without our head hurting?
Well, at the risk of giving what might sound like a trite answer, you join the congregation at St. Martin in the Fields. I mean, I say that, I don't say that, I hope, immodestly, but what I find I'm so proud of about St. Martin's, but also what I find so gratifying, is that St. Martin's effortlessly, and I say effortlessly, I don't mean people don't work hard or that we don't have conflict or we aren't short of money or all of those things, but people effortlessly embody pretty much everything I said in that lecture. I'm not saying this is the only church that I've been involved with, or I could say that, but I've been here for the last 11 years, so I've forgotten about most of the others. And that's a bit harsh, but you know what I'm saying. This is where my energies are spent, and I have worked hard, and colleagues have worked hard, but basically people in this community, whether in the Sunday International group, for example, whether in the Being With course, whether in the disability work that Fiona leads, people get this on a kind of gut level and live it, and that's why this is such an energizing community to be part of. That sounds like a bit of a promo, but I am proud of this community, and the thing I'm proud of about this community is that it does embody those things. So to me, I was thinking when you were saying where this began, and I find it very difficult to say where this all began. Well, I think I know where it began. It began when I was a teenager, really, but that's for a different question. But I do remember a conversation I had with a friend in 2001, where I first learnt the word instrumentality, which may sound like a word that you've gone all your life not needing very much. But what that word meant to me, because it was a word that was new to me then, but what that word meant to me was the penny dropped in the middle of that conversation that almost everything we do, and I count myself as one of most here, is actually ancillary. It's actually a means towards an end. We try to earn a living in order to, we try to get qualifications in order to, we read a book in order to, learn about, train in something, whatever. But we as a society are incredibly bad at finishing those sentences. So everything we do is somehow instrumental. We might pick up something in order to, I go to this nightclub because I might meet a potential future partner or something like that. It's all kind of for the sake of something else. And I suppose from that moment, for the next 7 years or so, I spent my time trying to answer the question, what's at the end of that sentence? And it took me that long to find the words being with, because being with was at the end of that sentence. And the thing is, when I came to this community 11 years ago, I found a community that wasn't using that language, but was already embodying and instinctively understanding what really matters about that, the end of the sentence, that some things are worth doing for their own sake, and those things are fundamentally about relationship, and those things decenter myself and are about a community and not just about my own flourishing. All the things I said in the 4 things at the beginning, I found existed here, and so I'm not saying this is the only place in the world where they exist, but if you're not in a place like this, go and find one, because that is living a non-instrumental life, a life that's about purpose and goal, and not just about instrumentality of making some steps towards it. So
you've already begged my next question, because you said something about when you were a teenager.
Okay.
Tell us more.
Something about I think you know.
I think I do, but I want others to know.
Well, I've talked about this, and I don't like to talk about this too much because, I do know many people in this community, and many people, I know probably about half the people in the audience in the building tonight, and I've had, significant conversations with probably about half of that number. And so I know that what people have been through in life, in many cases, is much more challenging than what I've been through in my life. But the most challenging thing in my life was that when I was a child, my mother was dying, and it became clear as I was a teenager that she didn't have long to go. So sacrificially, what she did was to train me to cook, to wash clothes, to do all the things I needed to do to be a boy in a household where my sister had gone away to college by that stage, where there was just me and my father. So what I did in result of that, and obviously this is a sadness to me now, but this is, the life's lessons aren't learnt by the wonderful things you instinctively did. They're mostly learnt by the things you did because of where you were and you were out of your depth emotionally. I basically spent too much time in the kitchen cooking meals that my mother was never going to eat, rather than being with her in the bedroom, even if she wasn't able to talk or there wasn't much for me to say. I couldn't cheer her up. Because I couldn't cheer her up and I couldn't make the situation better, I tried to go and do something I could do. Now I look back, and now I've got a language for that. I call that working for, because I could, working for being easier than being with. And that was obviously I didn't realize any of that at the time. It's only in later years that I've come to give that some language. But I also understand how many of us have been in those situations in our life where we found the working for much easier than the being with, because the being with is looking into the face of tragedy and looking at stuff we can't fix. However, I now, as I think about my mother's last years, cherish the times I was with her, even when it was silent, even when she was asleep, because I felt that was real living, much more than me pretending to do something useful in the kitchen. Although it was useful, I learned how to cook. So I think that's where it really all began. And those sort of instinctive feelings. And then when I went to a shipyard parish that you mentioned, my first parish, and we got the news from London, the news was always from London, that's why people hate London in the northeast, that the shipyard was likely to close, I revisited emotionally that experience I'd had as a teenager about that sense of terminal illness, and what I needed to do was simply be with people, not come up with some clever idea with the financiers to kind of rescue the place. Many other people tried to do that. And then again, when I was on that council estate in Norwich, where we lived together, there was the same sense of identifying with that sense of poverty but almost terminal illness, the fact that things weren't going to get better, even with all that government investment that came in. And I felt, again, I reconnected with that sense of what it was like for me as a teenager, and there was something that felt I knew what to do because I needed to do right what I'd got wrong when I was younger.
There are some here who might, well, I'm speaking for myself now, I'm just hiding behind others, who would feel that sounds quite fatalist, that God is a God of solidarity, God is not here to fix problems. So what do we do about the problems of the world? Do we do anything? Do we simply watch?
Well, the thing is, if you're in a profession which is about fixing other people's problems, what you find is you get quite frustrated when you're new to that profession that no one seems to say thank you. And if you reflect on why no one says thank you, it's not too easy to work out why. The reason is that what you've done is, by the transaction that you've carried out, you've reinforced your high social status as being the answer to the world's problems. And you've basically reinforced their reality as a basket case who's defined only by their problems. So when you put it like that, it's fairly easy to say why no one says thank you, because all you've done is reinforce their lowly social status. What you do in the face of the world problems is you walk alongside people and you don't desert them while they learn to solve their own problems. That's one of the things that life has taught me. You can't fix other people's problems. You can only walk alongside them while they learn to find better outcomes to their problems for themselves. That's with rather than for, in a nutshell. That means, the people of Gaza today and the people of Israel in a different way need to know we are with them. we are thinking about them, we are talking about them. We are getting in touch with people we know whose origins lie in that part of the world, whether they live in this country or another part of the world right now. We're getting in touch and we're saying, I'm thinking of you. We're with them to the best of our ability. But I think if anyone ever in their lifetime, and I think everyone here is old enough to know what I mean by this, if anyone ever thought you could fix another country's problems, then I think the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq taught us a lesson we should never forget. We just made the problems worse and spent a vast amount of money and killed a lot of people doing so. So you can't fix another country's problems, you can't fix other people's problems, but you absolutely mustn't walk away from it. And I think that's basically my understanding of ministry, is ministry is sitting beside people as they face the hardest things in their lives and not walking away from them, not saying something worse happened to me, not changing the subject or saying, here's a funny story about something ghastly that's happened to you. Because all of those are saying we can't face the being with. The being with, to me, is all there is. And again, that's the cross. The cross is Jesus being with us whatever happens, whatever the cost to God, and whatever the extent of our rejection. It's God saying, I will hang on. I will never let you go.
Okay, my next question is slightly different. You said, I think, the Old Testament is not a pre-ordered script for Jesus. I want to ask, what is it then? And the second part of that is, why did it take so long for Jesus to become incarnate?
Well, now this is where I have the fun, because I point out to you that she's the one with a PhD in Old Testament.
That's why I'm asking the question. I'm just checking that there's a point.
Well, I think there are three words that to me sum up the whole Bible and are as true of the Old Testament as they are of the New. And you'll, having sat through 45 minutes of me saying what I think about life, the universe, and everything, you'll understand the significance of these three words without me needing to explain them, but of course I will explain them a little bit. The first is covenant, the second is community, and the third is communion. And I think if you look through the Old Testament, you'll find that covenant is that pivotal theme, most obviously expressed in the Ten Commandments. And then it's no coincidence that the Bible is called by Christians the Old Testament and the New Testament, sometimes translated the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, that the understanding of Jesus' death and resurrection are that this is the new Mount Sinai, the fulfillment of the Ten Commandments, the fulfillment of the covenant, becoming the unbreakable covenant with all God's people. So then, secondly, community. Community is one of those sort of continuity words that when I was talking about instrumentality a moment ago. Community is the way that Israel is called to embody God's law, most obviously in not neglecting the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, and leaving the edges of its gleanings so that the poor can find their own food, those kind of forms of community. But obviously in the word koinonia, in the New Testament, community and church and fellowship all sort of blend into the same thing. So you will know they're Christians by their love and so on. And then the third word is communion. Again, communion is that meeting. Angela preached a lovely sermon 2 or 3 weeks ago here about the face of God and the back of God. That communion is that intimate meeting of Moses with God, definitive sort of being with, but also communion most obviously is Jesus' relationship with his disciples, and most definitively expressed in the Last Supper and the Eucharist. So those are all themes that I think, in a sense, rather than seeing the Old Testament as a kind of plan A that failed and had to be replaced by Jesus, I think we can see the continuity of God manifesting through a people in the Old Testament and then to the whole world in the New, the constituents of what I would describe as eternal life, covenant, community, and communion. So there's your PhD.
We'll talk about that later.
That's right.
I'll do one more question, so I just want to invite those of you who've got questions to start the queue, so to speak, in the centre aisle behind this microphone. And it would be quite helpful if you do stand behind one another, then I know how many questions we're dealing with, and it saves losing time. Let me just say to you, no question too stupid. Okay? A simple question is delightful. The only problem with a question is if it's too long. Okay? So please keep questions short so that we can have as many as possible. Sam's allowed to answer as long as he likes. Okay, I've got so many, but I think my last question to you is, why has no one said all this before?
Well, the experience that Sally Hitchener and I had when we ran the first Being With course was that after the session on the cross, where I explained more or less the same sorts of ideas in briefer form as I did tonight, one of the participants shook their head and said, "Why has no one ever told me this before?" And it's become a kind of, in fact, that's when I wrote the book Humbler Faith, Bigger God a couple of years ago during the pandemic. Its original working title was "Why Has No One Told Me This Before?" I think you can give all sorts of answers to that question. And when I say all sorts of answers, you can give, I'll just give an illustration of a kind of real edgy answer that I don't think would be my answer, but I can imagine it would be some people's answer, would say, look at the doctrine of the atonement. Isn't this a fantastic doctrine? It enables you to be completely right with God with something that does not need to affect your social reality in any significant way. So what a fantastic doctrine for an oppressive government to impose and to encourage its people to adopt, that you get to have this sense of pie in the sky when you die that doesn't have to affect any of your social realities other than conformity to God, to the church, and to society. That would be a reason why people weren't told this for hundreds of years, because it's a very unsettling social reality. Tom Holland, when he gave the lecture with Richard, I think it was our second or third lecture in this series, talked vividly about the revolutionary quality of equality that was so scary for the early for the Roman Empire that the early Christians had to be executed. So that would be one reason why people haven't been told this before. But my answer to that question is what I said about the anthropocentrism. We, the Christians throughout the last 2,000 years have taken a story fundamentally about God's utter longing to be with us and have instrumentalized it, turned Jesus from an incredible gift to an instrument to fix what we regarded as our two fundamental problems: our stupidity, our failures, our sin, and our mortality, the fact that we're going to die. And we've instrumentalized Jesus as an instrument to fix that problem. I think that's not that's probably a pretty harsh way to describe conventional Christian doctrine, but I think that has been what's happened, and I think we need to repent of it. But it's quite easy to see why it has happened, because we do regret the things we've got wrong and the broken relationships, and we obviously are terrified of dying. So the fact that Jesus seems to be an instrument to fix those two things is very attractive. Sometimes you've got to, what I'm suggesting as a true faith is that we let go of our determination to write the script for Jesus and just allow ourselves to be embraced by the arms of Jesus and let Jesus do the rest. I know that sounds perhaps a little bit pious to put it like that, but I think in the end, faith is as simple as that. It's about not writing out a contract and asking God to fulfill it for us. It's about trusting that God will give us more than we desire or deserve.
Thank you. Now, to audience questions. And comments are also welcome. Doesn't have to be a question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam, as always. Really awesome stuff. I just had a question. We talked about church at the end, but in theory, if God is relationship, wherever relationship occurs, God is present and very much there, regardless of religion, belief, creed. It could be at a pub on a Wednesday night. And so I guess my question is, for those of us that are struggling to be a part of a church community, have left for a number of reasons, is there room in this expansive theology to include the idea that, or do you need to be part of a Christian community? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So shall I just repeat the question? Or
Why don't you?
Yeah, so the question is, for those who struggle with church for one reason or another, is there room to embrace what I've described in the blessing of relationship more generally, rather than specifically in the context of church? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, and is that enough?
Yeah, is that enough? So, okay, I want to finish with that last additional word, enough, that you cared enough about to want to add it in at the end of my summary. Because enough for what? I think I'm going to put words into your mouth now, but what I'm hearing in that question is that enough to be called a Christian, so much so that it gets us into the heaven when the guillotine comes down? Will that do? Will we get good enough marks? Will that fully qualify? I mean, my answer is, why, given what I've said, in all modesty, I'm sure other people could say it better, why wouldn't you want to be a Christian? Wouldn't you want to be part of that wonderful story and be embraced by that story? It seems to me it's only... the thing about, once you say that the relationship is the end and not the means, then you stop worrying about whether you're going to get into heaven or not, because actually you're for the first time trusting.
I'm not worried about any afterlife destination, more just a sense of, is there room for that? Would you call that orthodox? Is that okay? Is God...
I don't think it's up to me. I just don't think it's up to me. I suppose if again, I would say if you've laid out a notion of Christianity that's like that, and a relationship that's like that, then if you can show me a quality of relationship that exceeds that, bring it on, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's the work of the Holy Spirit beyond the church. That's what I would call the kingdom of God, or the realm of God, to use a less gendered term. Mission has historically tended to be described as the church having some sort of gold and then distributing bits of it around the place. To me, mission is much more about seeing where the Holy Spirit is at work and going to find it and being with and learning from the quality of being with that's happening there. So I think that sense that how, frankly, I mean, what was that statistic about? Was it Spanish clergy that came out a week ago or something, about 200,000 people that have been abused by Spanish clergy in the last generation? I mean, after all the horrific disclosures about how the church has been in the 21st century, let alone all the ghastly centuries that went before, how the church has the, I don't know what the expression I mean, but the arrogance to suggest that it gets to contain all the goodness of God and life. I have no idea.
Okay, I should have said, I think we'll take two at a time from here on, and I'm guessing there are some online as well. You'll make sure those get their place. Great.
Hi. Yes, two questions and
two at a time from one person.
That's right. The first one is, I've recently come across Rupert Sheldrake, who writes about morphic resonance. And I think I understand him in that sort of we're part of a sea of consciousness, and we as human beings are sort of antennae that plug into this consciousness and then go back to it. So the point of life is becoming more conscious as a universe. And so I'd appreciate your comments on that. My second question relating to that is that life is relationship, which you've made beautifully. And a couple of weeks ago on the BBC Radio 4, you gave an amazing thought for the day on rage and
there's another
anger.
one coming tomorrow morning.
Wonderful. And so I guess in light of what you've said today, you know, over the weekend, I've met a couple of people who have rage about what's happening in the Holy Lands. And I struggle how to deal with that. And I try to listen and be. But I really struggle with that. So my question is, as a community here, practically, do you have any pointers on how we can try to convert some of the rage around the Holy Lands into anger and love together?
Thank you. I'll take one more.
Thank you. Let's take one more since we had two from one. Is it Jolly? Is it we have got one online? Great.
Absolutely. We have one from online from Fiona, who says, you say sin and death are very much with us, and that sin and death are not the main issue. So her question is, in your view, how does God ultimately deal with the problem of evil, if evil is not disempowered or defeated by the cross and resurrection of Christ? Surely the essence of being with God can't include us being with our holy God in an unholy state.
Sorry, what was the last word? In an unholy...
In an unholy state.
State.
Okay.
Okay, so I think in Rupert Sheldrake, the problem with Rupert's picture is it isn't fundamentally relational for me. That sense of plugging into a wider consciousness still is based on an individual model for me, individual and whole. There isn't that relational element. As far as the other half of the thought for the day about how we turn our rage into constructive anger, we simply have to make relationship. I mean, I'm afraid I'm a broken record on this. I think I mentioned it in an earlier answer. We have to find those, you know, we simply have to find people from a Palestinian background. We have to find people who are perhaps Jews and have family living in Israel right now. We have to allow relationship to dismantle enmity. Rather than what so often happens on social media, which is we turn to social media for enmity to be inflamed into hatred. We have to make relationships that dismantle enmity. That is how I'd respond to that question. So the question about
the problem of evil.
Problem of evil. Okay, let's settle that one briefly. So I gave 4 descriptions of sin and evil at the end. You might have been sort of getting a bit tired by the end, but a copy will be available on our website in the next few days, so you can go back to that. But my fundamental understanding of evil is that it is a false story. And that's why I locate sin not in the doctrine of anthropology, as it's usually known by those who've done a theology degree here. It's, you know, sin is usually an aspect of what it means to be a human being, and that's the way it's treated. I would relocate it into Revelation because it seems to me one of the, if you like, the kind of costs of creation is that if you're going to have a truthful story, there has to be the possibility of an untruthful story. And an untruthful story is one that says everybody did it, so it doesn't really matter if I do it. Nobody will notice. I've done so many good things that it doesn't matter if I do a bad thing, or surely no one can make a big deal of this. Look at what those people over there do. You know, those are all false stories, and they're all the stories we tell ourselves when we sin. Evil, I rather like Augustine, I don't think that evil really exists. You know, certainly isn't an essence, to use the essence existence. It is a false story. It's a fantasy, fundamentally. So rather than God redeeming all things and therefore evil somehow come with them like a stowaway in a car or something, or in a caravan, I don't see it that way. I think as we're translated from existence into essence, the falsehood of our stories falls off us. And so in essence, there can be no evil. That's how I understand it.
Okay, 3 more.
I'll try and be fast. I know you want fast questions. First of all, just really thank you for doing this. It's really appreciated by me and everybody here, I'm sure. The question is this. Do you ever, as you're formulating where you stand, have uncertainty or doubt?
Moi?
Moi. And how do you, to the extent that you do, how do you get to a place where true theology is even knowable by our human minds?
Great question, thank you.
I think this might be a related question to the last one, in that, and take it as a devil's advocate type of question. In your talk, you seem to depend quite heavily on the literal truth of the Bible, to the extent that you quote specific words being said at certain times, and even go back to Adam and Eve. When I think it's, and I'm no expert in this field, it's generally accepted that the Bible is not a very accurate or dependable record of history. So how much of what you have said depends on the accuracy of the Bible, which you have quoted, and how much is your human insight into the human condition that doesn't actually depend on a Christian belief, and in fact, the Christian belief perhaps interferes with that fundamental insight? Do you need Jesus for the significance of with rather than for to be valid?
Great.
That's question
Two.
one.
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
One.
Two.
Two.
No, the one was about do I have a doubt?
That's right. Sorry. Jolly, have you got another one from online? No? Let's have one more.
Good evening. When you speak about, for someone who's worked in overseas development, I certainly sympathize with the idea that we can't really solve other people's problems. We can be with them and sort of be along there to talk to them and help them. But let's look at it from another angle. What if we are the problem? I mean, think of all this city, which is at the center of basically a money laundering network, a reputation laundering network with large, very powerful law firms who have been helping to launder the reputations of oligarchs. It's been pointed out. What was that famous book about it? Butler to the World.
Keep going to the question if you don't mind, because there's two or three people behind you.
So, in view of that, while one can say, well, we can't solve people's problems, but perhaps we can address us being the problem, particularly when our government is giving it a green light to drop bombs endlessly on a certain people in the Middle East.
Right.
Thank you. Doubt
Okay.
Bible?
Yes, I doubt. I think I doubt every day. And in a sense, what I have shared with you tonight is the heart searchings, the wrestlings, and the conclusions I've come to out of those times of, I guess out of a recognition that doubt and isolation are for me more or less synonyms. They're almost the same thing. That's to say, my doubts are, there is only me here. Even my wife is an illusion. God is an illusion. The reality out there isn't really there, and I won't be here for very long. I mean, I think that probably summarizes my doubts, and that's before breakfast. So in a sense, what I've shared with you is how I work my way back from there. And it is mostly, I walk into morning prayer and there are my colleagues. Turns out there are 100 people online. And it turns out they're all carrying me. So it's a relationship that restores me in the midst of doubt. And I think it's from that I've worked my way back. So the question about could you have all of this about Jesus, I think, does it all rely, I'll answer the kind of, in a sense, simpler question that prefaced that does it need Jesus question, which is to say, Do I depend on the literal truth of the Bible? Well, if there was a fundamentalist here tonight, I somehow think there probably isn't, but they would be disgusted with pretty much everything I've said. So those are the guys that say they believe in the literal truth of the Bible, and they wouldn't be at all impressed with what I've said, because I don't believe in the literal truth in the Bible in that sense. To me, the Bible is a story that forms our character, that forms our habits, that forms our traditions, and we perform those traditions together and then keep going back to our foundational story. But if you think about how the Bible came to be written, it was written by people who had a sense of that story and then sat round together and retold that story to each other and said, no, Jesus didn't say it quite like that. Or Moses, that happened to Moses. The manna story, that all happened before the Ten Commandments. That's how the Bible was written. So I think that sense that it floated down like my children's Bible had a sort of, like that thing from the Addams Family, that sort of hand that just sort of wrote the Bible in a kind of, always a white hand for some reason. I don't see it that way at all. I think it's all about community and it's all about relationship. So going back to, could we do it all without Jesus? Well, the penny drop moment for me was, and many of you have heard this before, when I realized that Jesus spent like a week of his life working for us, 3 years in Galilee working with us, and 30 years being with us. And so you can say, isn't that interesting? You already had those categories. I didn't really already have those categories until I had that penny drop moment that 90% of Jesus' life was being with us. And that's basically the underpinning. I've written about that a lot elsewhere, so I didn't talk about it tonight. But that's the underpinning for all of this theological. So I don't think you can have it without Jesus. And have I got to stop before I get to the third question? Sounds like I have.
It's going to be the last one.
Okay.
Are we the problem?
Are we the problem?
I'm really sorry to those standing. You'll have to be the first downstairs.
You're much stricter than I am. I did already know that. I think we sometimes are the problem. I think I've got myself in trouble for saying this before, but I'll say it again. I think that's why Jesus was crucified, because he said to people, you are the problem, and they didn't like it. I think from time to time the prophets, Jesus wasn't just a prophet, but he certainly was a prophet. And when he said to the people, the Jerusalem leadership of his time, you are the problem, you're as bad as the Romans, almost worse, because you're claiming righteousness, but you're actually cozying up to the oppressor, you are the problem. They put him on the cross. So sometimes I think we do have to say that, whether in terms of the details about the lawyers that you quoted and the bankrolling that you quoted, that's another matter. But it's still foundational to my faith that it begins on my knees in repentance. I think if it begins anywhere else, it's not the real thing.
On behalf of everyone here, Sam, I want to say thank you to you for your lecture tonight and for all the work that lies behind that lecture and the life that is lived behind it, that is shared with us. Thank you. Four things quickly just left to say is that Sam and I will go downstairs to the foyer where books are available if you want more of Sam Wells, and then those two people who didn't get to ask their question, they should be first in the queue. But the point of the drink is also to be with one another, where we can, be with one another and be with a drink. On your way out, you'll see a little credit card machine. You're encouraged to give as you are able and as you feel moved. Obviously, to keep this church going in order to be with others costs a fair amount. You can give cash or by card. You should have been given an evaluation on your way in this evening. It would be really helpful, not least for planning the next autumn series, if you would fill it in and give it again on your way out. And the final thing is that our next lecture, Here I Stand, Death and Dying, is next Monday, with leading experts from the world of palliative care, Catherine Sleeman and Rachel Clark, and it will be chaired by our curate, Angela Sheard, who previously worked as a medical doctor. So, see you next Monday. Thank you.